Okay, everybody, this is going to be the second video tutorial for your Romeo and Juliet essay. This video is going to focus primarily on guiding you in how to write your body paragraphs for your essay. So this is the second video. You should have already finished the introduction of your essay. That should be completed. So if you have not completed your introduction, if these boxes are not filled, then you need to go back and watch the previous video attached to the assignment, so you can complete that part. But if you have your introduction done, you are now ready to move on to your first body paragraph. Now, I'm just going to show you how to outline one part of your body paragraph, and then what you'll need to do is basically practice that process and repeat that process throughout the rest of your other body paragraphs and throughout the rest of the essay. So I'm going to show you just one example, and then it's going to be up to you to continue to do it for the rest of your essay. Okay? Now, there are three things I would like you to have open for this portion of the essay. The first is clearly this outline, so you should have this outline open in a tab. If you don't have this outline open, please have it open now. The other two items you're going to want open is, you can go back to the assignment again, is I have the actual play itself from the litcharts.com that I've given to you with both the original and translated versions on it open, because I'm going to be pulling some evidence from there as I write. And I also have the Google Slides open to the slide for the notes for the assignment, to the slide about how to use textual evidence, because that's something you're going to do as well in your body paragraphs. Okay, so if I come back to this outline, we're at body paragraph number 1. Now remember, each body paragraph follows a different point. So I'm going to go back up to my thesis statement here, and I'm going to read the thesis statement one more time, and you notice mine will be different because mine will be incomplete, where yours should have 3 points. So here's the thesis statement. Although there are many characters and factors that contribute to the overall tragedy of the play, the 3 most prevalent and significant factors are the feud between the Montagues and the Capulets, and then you can see I left off the last part blank. I chose this one because I figured this is one that a lot of people are doing. So I'm going to use this one as an example just to give you some guidance. But of course, you should have 3 different things or factors that you're blaming for the tragedy. Okay? And what you basically do is you just take your first one that you're going to talk about, the first one that's listed in your thesis statement, and you're going to write your first body paragraph about that first example. So I'm going to be writing about how the feud between the Montagues and the Capulets played a significant role in the tragedy of the play. All right, so if you come down to body paragraph number 1, it says the first thing you want to do is make your first claim or reason to connect to the thesis statement. So here's what I do. I take my point and I start it off with a nice, strong topic sentence. Remember, every body paragraph should start off with a topic sentence that lets you know what that paragraph is going to be about. So I can literally say something like this. One of the most significant factors that lead or that causes the tragedy of the play is the feud between the Montagues and the Capulets. Again, a very specific, concise, and direct, clear statement about what this paragraph is going to be arguing, what this paragraph is going to be setting out to prove, right? So now I know that this whole paragraph should be different examples of how the feud between the Montagues and the Capulets caused tragedy in this play. So what I'd like you to do right now, if you haven't, is to pause the video and write your first claim for your first point for your own essay. So if it's different than mine, take your first example that you are writing about and write a topic sentence for your first body paragraph. Pause the video and do that now. Okay. If you're back, then I'm assuming you have this box completed. If you're not confident, you can always ask us, and we can let you know if it's a strong topic sentence or a good topic sentence to guide the rest of the paragraph. So now the next thing I need to do is start giving examples. You see I have example 1, example 2. Oops, I made a mistake there. And example 1, example 2, and it says example 3 if needed. You're going to want to try to have 3 examples, but sometimes you might not have 3 good ones. As long as you have 2 strong examples, that should be enough to support your reasons. But if you could come up with a third, 3 is always the best. We always go by the rule of 3 here. But I'm just going to show you how to outline one example, and that will be for, again, the feud between the Montagues and the Capulets. So the first example I'm going to provide is I'm going to start off by just talking about how we see this feud at the beginning of this story. So I'm going to say, as the story begins in Act 1, Scene 1, the Montagues and Capulets are or have been fighting often in Verona. Right? So I give an example of what the feud has been causing. It's been causing to a lot of fights. Right? But now I want to support my example with some textual evidence from the story that supports what I'm saying. Now, this evidence can be a direct quote. Sometimes it could just be you kind of giving your own specific example. But I would like you to try to incorporate quotes from textual evidence. So what I got to do is I got to go back into the story and I got to find a quote to help support my example, right? So I'm going to go back to my lit charts here, and I'm going to, because I'm talking about Act 1, Scene 1, I'm going to scroll down all the way to line 90. I know the story very well. And there's a quote right here, actually it's line 87, 88, 89, where the prince says, 3 civil brawls, bred of an airy word by thee, O Capulet and Montague, have thrice disturbed the quiet of our streets. A quote I know we've talked about in this class, that's why I'm using it. So I'm just going to copy it just to save some time, and I'm going to bring it over here. And I'm going to paste it. Now watch what happens when I paste it, though. When I paste it, you see that it's got a different font size. It is not Arial 12 like the rest of the essay. It's Arial 13 and a half. It's also got some blue highlighting behind here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to get rid of the highlighting. So I come up here and go to none. Right? I'm also going to change the font to 12. That way all the font's the same. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring these lines up here and bring this line up here, just so I have it all written like statements that you would see in an actual essay. But you can't just toss a quote in there without explaining that quote. So if you go back to these notes that I provided, I gave you examples on how to introduce a quote and how to cite a quote properly, right? One thing you want to do is you want to always introduce the quote by who's talking and the context around the quote. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to write what was happening at this moment. So the prince says to all the citizens, and I'm going to put a comma, and then I'm going to put quotes around what he actually says too, right? Because we're quoting something, we got to have actual quotation marks around it, right? But notice how I have a lead in here into the quote. I don't just throw a quote in with no context. I'm talking about who says this quote and what was the context around it. So I said, the prince says to all the citizens, 3 civil brawls, bred of an airy word, by thee, O Capulet and Montague, have thrice disturbed the quiet of our streets. Now, this still isn't cited properly, because if you go back to our notes, one thing you need to do is you want to put a slash at the end of every line to show the line break. This is how you properly cite poetry or Shakespearean text in writing. So if you kind of notice it in the example that I have here, I have a slash between these 2 lines. So I got to come back to my document here, and I'm going to put a slash after the first line. So I'm going to put one right there because that's the end of the first line. And then I'm going to come right here, and I'm going to put another slash to let you know that that's the end of the second line going into the third line. So again, this document right here, this part of the notes, really shows you how to do it, but you could also see how I did it right here on the screen. But am I done? Nope, not yet, because remember, you also got to cite it properly, where you found this evidence. And we do that with parentheses at the very end. And don't worry about the colors, but you got to put the act, the scene, and the line numbers. So I'm going to go back here and I'm just going to remind myself, oh yeah, this was Act 1, Scene 1, line 87, 88, and 89. So I'm going to come back to my document. I'm going to put a 1 for Act 1. I'm going to put a 1 for Scene 1. I'm going to put 87 to 89 in parentheses, and then a period at the very end. Notice how I didn't put a period here. I put a period at the very end of the citation, because that's the proper way to cite this text. Right? Now, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to write down your first example that you're going to use to support your whatever it is you're talking about in this essay, as well as find a piece of textual evidence and try to cite it properly in this box. So I'd like you to pause the video and try to complete these two boxes for your first example. So pause the video and do that now. Okay, if you're back, then I'm assuming that you have these three boxes filled, but as you can see, we're not done. So now we have to do two more things. We can't just give evidence. Remember, like we used the analogy of a lawyer, that you can't just give evidence without explaining its purpose. So you want to talk about what was suggested by your evidence or your example, and why does it matter in terms of your bigger argument for your essay. So what is suggested in this moment? What is the prince basically saying? This is kind of somewhat of a modern translation, but you don't want to repeat it word for word. You just kind of give a brief summary or implication of what was being implied by this evidence. So I'm going to say something along the lines of this moment showcases or shows that there has been a great amount of fighting between the two families even before the play has begun. Because the prince has said, 3 civil brawls, bred of an airy word by Captain Montague, have thrice disturbed the quiet of our streets. Again, we talked about this line before, right? I could even elaborate and say that, according to the prince, these fights began over airy words. I'm going to cite that again. Remember, those were like words that had really no meaning. And there have been 3 recent violent acts between the two houses. So basically, what was suggested by the actual quote that you used, right? But that's still not enough. What really is important is, why does this matter, right? Why does this moment help prove my overall argument? So, and notice how I say, don't say it matters because, just write why it matters. So I'm going to write this. The recent violence, this is why it matters. The recent violence between the two houses showcases how impactful this feud has become. Moreover, you know me, I like transition words. I like to use moreover, therefore, however. I think they just sound great in your writing. Moreover, it leads to the prince declaring a new law that if a person fights, they will be put to death. Again, we've talked about this, right? So I talk about why this moment matters, why this fighting and violence is significant, but that's still not enough. I want to elaborate a little bit more on why I think this is important. So I could say something like, a law that will drive some of the tragic actions later in the play. lot of typos there. There we go. All right, so again, you notice how when it says what is suggested, I don't say use the word suggested at all. I just write. Why does it matter? I don't say it matters because I just write. That is what I want you to try doing. So you're really trying to explain how does this evidence support my argument. So what I'd like you to do right now is to pause the video and complete these two boxes. What is suggested by this evidence and why does it matter? So pause the video and do that now for your point. All right. If you're back, I'm assuming that you have your first full example completely outlined. All these boxes have been completed. And you're now ready to move on to your second example. So what I need to do now is I need to come up with a second reason or a second example of how the feud between the Montagues and the Capulets led to some of the tragedy in the play. And I would write that second example here. Again, I would back it up with evidence, talk about what is suggested and why does it matter. I just kind of wash, rinse, and repeat what I did for the first example, only for another example that occurs later in the story. And then I would want to come up with a third one, if I could come up with a third one. Notice again, it says, if needed, so you don't necessarily need a third example, but it definitely helps to have a third, especially if you come up with one. So I would have a third example of how the feud affected the story. Again, so you want to just continue this process for the rest of your body paragraph number 1. So pause the video and do that now. All right, if you're back, then I'm assuming all of these boxes have been completed, which means that you're ready now to move to your second body paragraph. Now, I'm not going to show you what to do for the second body paragraph because it's the same thing that you just did for your first body paragraph. Only you're now moving on to your second point, the second person or factor that you're going to blame for the tragedy of the play. And then you would do the same thing for your third body paragraph. You would move on to the third point that you're going to make and the third factor or person that you're blaming for the tragedy of the play. And if you do all that properly, again, this should take some time. This might even take a few days to outline all 3 of your body paragraphs. Right? But once you've done all that, all of your boxes should be completed, and then you'll be ready to do your conclusion and to put your essay together for our final draft. All right, so good luck with your body paragraphs. As always, if you need any help, you know you can pause the video or at least try writing some and call us over and we can give you some guidance if needed. Good luck on outlining those body paragraphs.